Hello. Hi, John. We are live today. Hello, everybody. I am Kate Howe. I'm the co-founder of Postcards for Parents. Welcome to our weekly office hours with John Stewart.
Good to see you. Yes, I'm John Stewart. You stole my thunder, Kate. I was going to say my name. I don't know what else to say, though. I'm John Stewart. I'm a clinical psychologist and the proud clinical director supporting the work of Postcards for Parents.
Yeah, so we are glad to be here this week, and we're talking about risk, which is something that, I don't think it's very talked about much. I mean, it's sort of... usually as parents, we're trying to mitigate risk and get rid of risk. So we put on sunscreen and we buckle bike helmets and we stand next to the monkey bars and we tell our kids, not to talk to strangers. And all these things are...
You are indeed a mother, Kate. Those came to mind very quickly.
Oh, yeah, I've got my whole list. And these are, they totally make sense. Those particular ones absolutely make sense. And also just this vigilance is a result of, thousands and thousands of years of trying to survive and trying to mitigate risks. And we may be in a kind of unique era in which we've been very successful in mitigating a lot of risks, and sometimes it even goes too far. So what we're talking about is how kids need a certain amount of risk and challenge. So can you start with that? Like, what is good about challenge or risk for kids?
Yeah, Kate. I mean, I think that I like your perspective that we're culturally at an interesting point in terms of the way in which we think about risk, because there are so many ways to mitigate it that there didn't used to be. There are vaccines, there are helmets, there are seatbelts, there are all those kinds of things. And unfortunately, this isn't a slam at personal injury attorneys, but there's also been an enormous push towards when something bad happens, somebody is culpable. Mm-hmm. And that has been partially associated with personal injury law, and that it's just heightened the whole culture's concern around risk. I've lived in Latin America quite a bit over the last 25 years, or 40 years actually, and their attention to risk is very different. I'm not mm-hmm. saying it's better, but it is different, and the cultural contributing variables to how we manage risk is enormous. So how do challenges help kids? Well, I mean, I think that they help kids in a lot of ways. I think one of the things that we've talked about is that, Cohen talked about it, the zone of proximal development. There's also the Vygotsky talked about zone of, Cohen talked about optimal frustration. Vygotsky talked about a zone of proximal development, and lots of other developmentalists have looked at it. But it essentially means that kids only really evolve in their sense of belief in themselves and their competencies by taking a risk, by in some way moving beyond what is comfortable and moving into a degree of challenge. Challenge is what helps us grow. It helps us grow socially. It helps us grow physically. It helps us grow emotionally. So I think that challenge is not the enemy. There's a difference between deciding you're going to strengthen your muscles and you're going to take one day and go out and try to lift up 300 pounds over and over again, from saying, I'm going to work on this and I'm going to get to 300 pounds. And so challenge has to be titrated in a way that allows us, as we go into the challenge, to ultimately discover success versus ultimately discovering failure. Because if the challenge is well suited, it then allows us to discover success and all the good things associated with that. Failure is not disastrous, but it is problematic. It does not move our sense of confidence to take further necessary risk forward. So challenge is absolutely critical. It's critical for kids. It's critical for us adults. If you live a life that doesn't have challenge and you've become afraid of being uncomfortable or feeling a little incompetent, well, your life isn't going to have a whole hell of a lot of vitality. It is vitality that we get from challenge, as well as involving sense of pride and comfort and belief in ourselves.
So that's so interesting. I mean, that sounds like it doesn't only apply to kids, but could it be applied to grown-ups as well? So it's like we don't want to fail, but yet without taking the risks or challenges, we kind of really lose something.
Yeah. I think so much of what we talk about, Kate, we talk about it with kids, but it's really not terribly different in us with adults.
So then that leads me to questions. So if it's a risk, there's inherently the possibility of failure. What happens when our kids fail to them, and then how should we respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, there is no way, even if we think about parents as finding that perfect place of challenge, sometimes we're going to miss the cue. We're going to put a child into a situation that they're not able to succeed at. Sometimes we may under challenge them. We can talk about that later. But I think that when kids fail, it's largely a task of helping them regulate their emotional response to that. Failure is not disastrous. It's not an annihilation of the self. It is an experience that we can learn from. And we also have to understand that none of us like failing. It doesn't feel great. It's a lot more fun to win or to succeed at something than it is to fail. But part of the work is, as we help kids move into a risk situation, is to let them know, this may be hard. I think you can do it. I'm pretty sure you can. But if you can't, it's not the end of the world. So that you're doing what you can to mitigate a really powerful response to potential failure.
Do you feel like, I'm very familiar with, for example, in Silicon Valley, they promote this culture of like fail fast, or if in schools that might promote a growth mindset, you might try and kind of frame failure as good because you're learning. Do you feel like those things are helpful? Do they help that? Just like
no, I think they do. I think they do. I had heard, I don't know if it's true, but I had heard that from a friend of mine who worked with Amazon that one of the things that they would assess you for is whether or not you had had a significant failure over the preceding year. And that if you had a significant failure, no, this is Whole Foods actually, before it was Amazon. If you had a significant failure, that was considered a positive mark because it meant you took a chance. So I think the business culture has certainly picked up on some of that. But I think that, absolutely, the idea that we lay out for our kids a narrative, a story that says it's good to take risk, it's good to take chances. You always want to be careful about which chances you take, and but failure is not something to be avoided, because you will never discover really anything new if you're too afraid of failure. And so life's too exciting to be limited to just the things that you're comfortable with.
Okay, yeah, and then afterwards, when they're having that kind of bad feeling, if they do have a failure, it's really that being there with them, all the emotional tools that we have that
and you've given them
that, and then it wasn't so bad, really, right?
Yeah, you've given them some anticipatory guidance, saying, it could happen. You can't, not a guarantee, and if it does, it's not the end of the world, buddy. But when it does, we don't. We certainly don't want to go back and say, well, the umpire didn't like you, or the ball wasn't fully inflated, or what. We want to go back and just be with them, with the sadness of not having something go well. You join them, you go, oh man, you tried hard, didn't go well. That's hard though, isn't it, buddy? You just show up emotionally to be with them. We're getting to the other side of that.
Cool. So I guess that leads me to the question of like, you've said a couple times like the right level of risk, or like we want our kids to take, maybe like a smart risk instead of a dumb one. Like what are good risks or challenges versus bad ones, and how do we help kids take the right ones? And also, just the second question, isn't that like overly, that seems so helicoptery, right? To like be there kind of managing, like it's like it's like pre-populating, it's not smoothing their path, it's like pre-populating their path with like just the right video game level, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I agree completely with what you're saying. That, I mean, there has to be some movement for our kids. It's not our job to always find that perfect spot. That perfect spot of challenge, you know, but not too much, is something our kids are seeking, because they have a, you know, Robert White talked about the developmental drive for competency. We have a developmental drive to be competent. Kids do. And so I don't think we always have to be looking for it. As a matter of fact, you're right. I think too much involvement in that can be problematic. Too much pushing or too much holding back. I have a grandson who's just turned 7, and oh God, he loves to climb on things. And his grandmother, who loves him as much as anybody could love a little guy, is a little apprehensive about these things. And so he will be out climbing a tree. I mean, you turn around and the kid's climbing something, climbing a tree or climbing up a wall, and his grandmother will look apprehensive, and then he'll be irritated with his grandmother because he'll want to do what he's wanting to do. He wants to prove something to himself and maybe to others as well. And what we've worked on teaching him to say to his grandma is, he calls her Mimi. He says, "Mimi, thank you for loving me, but I'm okay." So just trying to soften his pushback on her. I think that, how do we help figure out what's there? I mean, I do think we want a lot of it to be driven by what our kids are wanting. I think that's a really good point, Kate. We don't want to be, just constantly marshaling them into the right next perfect spot, because you need to learn how to fail as well as you need to learn how to succeed. What is a good risk? Well, a good risk is one that whether you win or you fail, whether you succeed or you fail, you're not hurt dramatically.
You're going to be safe.
You're going to be safe. And that's emotionally and physically. I think there are risks where, let's say you have a non-custodial parent who is not very reliable at showing up for visitation or to pick kids up. I mean, it's just kind of a sad situation. And their youngster wants to take the risk of expecting them to be there. And it is a risk because they know that. And then how do you, it's such a delicate issue that the parent needs to be able to honor the child's willingness to take the risk to believe in dad, but also prepare them for the fact that sometimes dad disappoints them. I mean, I think that there are all kinds of, and that's an emotional risk. It's not a physical risk that you need to manage in some way. Physical risk, the climbing walls, trees, whatever those things are, those are in some ways less complicated. But nonetheless, they are, you got to manage them. And we never want our kids to, if we remember that we're a mirror and they figure out who they are from us, we have to understand that when our kids experience us as pulling them back from a risk, they experience that as us reflecting back that in some way their judgment and their competencies are not what they think they are. And that has to be done with some degree of gentleness.
I mean, sometimes their judgment is not what they think it is. I mean, they don't know, I sort of...
Have you been with a toddler?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in a toddler in the physical world. And then I think as kids get older in kind of the social world, it's like they have a very safe family relationship. They might not know that other people can be dangerous in all sorts of ways. So
are there peer groups and peer members can be dangerous emotionally?
Right. So I think we're also talking about two levels. It's like they have to take their risks that they can take. And then there's also like they're learning to judge what risks are good to take. Yeah. And then probably we need to take risks, letting them make those judgments as well.
One of the dilemmas associated with adolescence is a really good body of literature to show that demonstrates that adolescents undervalue negative outcome and overvalue potential positive outcome. And they, around 21, 22, it's even earlier than that begins to shift. But it means that during adolescence, and there's some developmental value in this, because adolescents are needing to step out in the world on their own, and they don't have the experience to know that they've really that they really can do it. So they need to have the ability to take risk beyond what might make sense based upon their experiential background. It's true of the animal world too. You'll see adolescent monkeys and squirrels, and they tend to take much bigger risk than do adults. And that it is scary in the parenting of teenagers that their judgment of negative outcome is not going to be as powerful as their judgment of positive outcome. I can speak to a remarkable number of kids that I've worked with, and maybe even my own, whose parents were gone, and early on in their adolescence, where their parents were comfortable in leaving them alone home, maybe 15 or 16, for just, for maybe a night with a neighbor close by, realized that there would be great social kind of power in hosting a party without much awareness or thinking about the negative side of the fact that, well, you have 15 cars in your yard and your neighbor knows your parents are gone. They're going to come over. The police are going to show up. Something's going to get broken. It is just the best way to understand why adolescents are so scary to parents, because they have to do some of that. So, sometimes their judgment isn't good, and we've got to figure out how to gently manage that, whether they're 3 or 16.
Mm-hmm. So that leads to this question, which is, how do you manage your apprehension as a parent? Yeah. If you're, I think there's a couple things. One is that, we do know through experience, we have more understanding of the kind of maybe the real values of risk. Although sometimes we bring our own baggage and it's maybe not calibrated, but also we're not in control. So it's very scary for us. Whereas our child is the one, if they're climbing the tree or they're managing a social situation, they are like direct actors in that situation, whereas we're just completely kind of out of control. So that breeds apprehension as well. That's hard.
And I think, more often than not, from just a pragmatic, functional level, if your kid is engaged in something that's a little risky, and you're not in a position to be able to manage it, to stop it, to control it, and whether you're not in position because they won't developmentally allow you to, or not in position, well, then the task at hand is pretend that it's okay. It's okay. Because that's what's most likely to help them get through it. Because when the kids look in our eyes and they see fear, that undermines their adaptive capacities. I think it's often like watching a child walk across a balance beam or something like that. And if they see us looking, happy, like they're going to do fine, it greatly increases the likelihood that they're going to be able to make their way across, versus our saying, be careful, that's a long way down. The pads aren't all the way up there, so you sometimes have to make a choice. Another common one is when you see a little one kind of wandering towards the street further than you thought they were, that if you yell and look panicked, they're likely to run the other way. And so you oftentimes have to have this kind of consciousness in responding to the risks that your child has perhaps put themselves into, that demands of you that you fake it. You fake it until you make it. So, there's more of that in parenting than we'd like to think. Mm-hmm. In terms of apprehension, in a general sense, I think if you're lucky enough to have a partner who you trust and who works with you to think about this stuff, and so you don't feel like you have to feel it all the time. And oftentimes you'll have one parent more apprehensive about some types of things, and the other parent more apprehensive about other kinds of things. And that, there's no question that that's fear, and that fear is best managed in relationship. And so I think it is also okay to say to kids, Dad just gets, I'm sorry, buddy, you are doing so great, but I tend to worry too much. And sometimes you probably can't listen to me when I'm saying, be careful in the water, because I had a scary experience when I was a kid before I could swim, and you didn't, and you're going to be fine. So don't confuse dad's worried look with meaning that you're really in trouble there, buddy. So, I mean, I think you can talk about things. You give kids a coherent narrative to help them understand the things that they're experiencing emotionally and relationally, oftentimes with nonverbals, not verbals. It's always helpful.
But that depends on that, in that example, that father kind of realizing that it's more his stuff than an actual, risk. And do you, in your experience, I would think that most of those dads think that's a real risk that they should be stopping their child from.
I would say, unfortunately, you're probably right. And if you want to read the quintessential book for parents on this, it's Parenting from the Inside Out by Dan Siegel, about the importance of our understanding our own kind of psychological inner world, so that we can deal with it in a way that we don't carry it forward into our interactions with our kids. Carry forward the good stuff, but not the not so good stuff. And we've all got some not so good stuff. So that whole notion of being a conscious parent or parenting consciously does mean asking yourself, where does this come from? And trying to make sense out of it. And if it's really getting in your way, then you need to talk to somebody else. It could be a friend, it could be a therapist, it could be that's the way that we kind of move beyond those things that were planted in us by our early experience that can get acted out in our parenting. Is by first being aware of it, kind of feeling what it was like to have that experience, and then figuring out how to share it.
Yeah. And this is obviously not a black and white area, because what we're saying here is that some amount of risk is good. So if you're having apprehension, then, maybe investigate whether you could let your child do more. But yet we're not saying, never pull back or never stop them from going into the street or never. What about just like, I guess my question is, are there ways to kind of support a child as they go through a risk without reflecting all this anxiety,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think that, once again, our emotional presence, our ability to create a congruent and coherent narrative, like, this is going to be kind of hard. I think you can do it. If you don't, it's not the end of the world, buddy. It's just not, I don't mean to bombard you with tales of my role as a grandfather, but I was recently at an amusement park with one of my 11-year-old, my 6-year-old, and 4-year-old. And the 4-year-old is fearless. It's a little girl. She is absolutely fearless. And the 11-year-old was old enough to want some different kinds of adventures. And it left the 6-year-old in a spot where he was not very adventurous. There were a lot of rides he was not going on. And facing that situation, what do we do? Because I didn't want him to feel disappointed that he didn't go with his sister and cousin, but at the same time, not wanting to push him in a way that it was just going to, kind of generate within him not only an unwillingness to do it, but a shame about not doing it. So I think you just hang with him. You're playful about it. You try not to make a big deal out of it. You're hopeful. You say, there'll be a time when you'll do this. I know there is, but not today, and that's okay. There are things I didn't want to do that my brothers or other people did, and so I think you support them by first making them not feel backed into a corner with it, because a great many kids you backed into the corner and you can watch them just shut down. We've never talked about Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory and development, but Porges' notion that you can activate a withdrawal in the brain, and it is pretty tough to move beyond for a child or for a parent to do it. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to push.
I am one of those.
Yeah. You learn that.
Familiar.
You do. Yeah.
I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with tripping that shutdown switch.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of how you support a child to go through a risk if they're apprehensive. What if it's the child who's taking, who's like eager and taking too much of a risk? Can you still help them be more successful without kind of like, going into anxiety?
Yeah, I think no matter what, we as parents, when we're in a quiet and kind of receptive place, our kids listen to us better.
Mm-hmm.
So a panicked parent, as they watch their child go up the apple tree or whatever it is, a panicked parent, the child will shut down in response to. So stay chill, stay connected. Say, oh, buddy, you're up there a little higher than I want you to be. If you fell, I'd feel awful. Can you come down a little bit? Just being playful, not holy God, there's no hospital around for a 2-hour drive. There's no question they will listen to you better when you stay quiet, but clear. And so you're offering them your emotional connection and then a narrative that says, this is why this makes sense to me, buddy. So, and then sometimes when they're just, little ones, the toddlers who have no capacity to reason, they have tremendous mobility and no judgment. I mean, those you just sometimes have to gently pick up, and just say, we're not doing this. But once again, you do that in a calm way that says, you don't know how dangerous that is, sweetie. I'm here. My job is to keep you safe. So we're not doing that. And you may catch all kinds of hell for that. But it's sometimes what you have to do.
And I mean, also what I hear you saying is that if you can remain a little bit calm and then kind of talk through it, you're kind of saying like, oh, that's in different examples that you said today. Oh, it's making me nervous that you're going in the water because of this experience that I had, or you're a little bit higher than I feel comfortable with because of blah, blah, blah. Can you maybe step down? Or like, are you checking that the branch can bear your weight? You're kind of, I think also coaching the thought process that you want your child to go through in a little with
but only after you have connected.
Okay.
And that's your tone of voice as much as anything else. Your posture, your facial expression, and tone of voice. You got to connect, and then you can do that coaching.
Yeah.
Most kids will allow you to then.
And probably also reflecting back their sort of excitement or their fear. It's like kind of
that's part of the connection.
what they're feeling. That's cool.
That's part of the connection, is joining them. Oh my goodness, look how high you've been able to climb, buddy. That's incredible. Wait a minute. My heart's starting to beat a little fast. Buddy, I think you're up a little higher than I want you to be. It's a long way down there. You don't want to hurt yourself. When you can stay, and I make that sound like that's such an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do in the moment. In isolation here, it's pretty easy to do. But that is the task at hand from my perspective.
One thing I probably don't remember, but like theoretically always try to think about is like saying a strength first or a positive thing, like, wow, you've gone so high, you've made it up so high, so much more than you used to do, so that there's like a sense of, I guess, acknowledgement and accomplishment of the positive.
You kind of celebrate it with them, and they get to resonate with that, and they will then let you in closer. If they have a sense that you are judging in some way, they will block you out. And if they have a sense that you're judging with a degree of anxiety or irritation, they block you out further. This is true of spouses as well, by the way.
The positive, negative, positive sandwich, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Okay. And even the negative sandwich has to be delivered with a great deal of tenderness.
The
negative part of the sandwich.
The salami inside.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think those we covered all the questions that I had about risk. Is there anything that has come to mind while we've been speaking that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so. You're usually pretty good at getting the territory pretty well covered. I mean, I think it's it is certainly one of the harder parts about loving someone is embracing and letting them take risk. because in the absence of that, lives do lose vitality. It's hard with your teenagers, with your young adults. Here's one. We talked about toddlers. We talked about a little bit those elementary school age kids. We talked about teenagers. Let's talk about adult children for just 1 second.
Okay.
The most important thing to know as the parent of an adult child when you're watching them take risk is to shut up.
Okay.
Don't share your concerns. Share
Really?
only your supports, and that's that will be strongly endorsed by most adult children as the best way, because with adult kids, it's very easy to find yourself in the same traps that you do with younger children, where you think you're being helpful, or maybe you've even been asked what you think. Whenever you get asked by an adult child, what do you think about something that they're clearly thinking about doing? Know that it's a trap. Don't give them your real opinion, because it's not helpful. And I'm not saying because we're coddling them, or I'm just saying they are at a point in life when they need to do that, and they can seek consultation from a lot of people. And I'm not saying never. If your kid says, "Do you think I ought to get snow tires or not, Dad?" Tell them what you think about that. But they have no real emotional commitment to that. If there's something that you can tell they've got some emotional tie to, that they're working their way through, then you want to be very careful, because we have adult parents continue to have very heavy capacity to impact kind of the inner world of their kids.
I think that's a great point. That's not made frequently enough.
Yeah. It's made frequently by the children of the adult parents. Please shut up. Or they don't say it, but they're thinking it.
Yeah, or just there is a lot of discussion, I think, amongst my peers about how you're still kind of dealing with it. You get triggered basically by the issues or the baggage that you carry from.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no. My parents are both pretty long in the ground now, and I can have certain images that come up and go, "Oh, I know where that comes from."
Well, we have more impact than we feel in the moment, I think.
We do. We absolutely do. Yeah.
Well, cool.
So that covers the span pretty well.
Sorry?
That covers the age span pretty well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for this. I mean, I'm glad that we talked about this today, because, like I said, there's so much cultural weight against getting rid of risk, and there's so much emotional weight against taking challenges, or that we might fail at, that I think I'm glad to put a little bit of, plug for taking challenges and having.
I think the cultural variables set the stage for parents to own and feel guilty and shame about failed challenges much more than they used to. And so I think that's a dilemma. And that's probably what gives us helicopter parents. It isn't that they necessarily see their child as an extension of themselves and they need to have that somehow aggrandized. I mean, there may be some of that too, but it's just terror of the fact that something could happen and it'll be my fault that my kid got hurt.
Yeah, it would be good to backpedal some of that blame.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Kate, it's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
As it always is. And I will see you next week, and we'll discuss something else. I'm not sure what it is yet, but we'll discuss it.
Yeah, it'll be great. We'll see you there. Okay, thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.